Welcome back to Sportico Live's examination of NFL franchise valuations. We just heard from Stephen Jones, the COO of the Dallas Cowboys, number one on the list. Media, of course, a big part of what drives these valuations, and I can't think of anybody better to discuss it than Steve Bornstein, runs the North American operations at Genius Sports, our sponsor for the event. Thank you, Genius Sports. And Kevin LaForce, formerly of the NFL, now over at RedBird Capital. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining.
Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Sure. So either one of you, I ask, if we're going to start a conversation about the valuations of NFL franchises, must we start with media? Is that the right place because it drives the whole business?
You can take it, Steve.
I don't know if it's the right place to start. It's certainly, a major source of revenue and value for the National Football League. I mean, they sell a fair amount of sponsorship and tickets, and they have, good engagement with their fans. But at the end of the day, the single largest revenue stream is media, and potentially has the biggest upside for them as it continues to grow.
Steve, though, you've seen this over a time period, and you've seen it from different vantage points. Give me the 30,000-foot view of where media is today in terms of sport and the NFL, and how it drives value perhaps in the future.
Well, my crystal ball is as good as anybody else's. But what I have learned, both being from working at ESPN and then at the National Football League, and then ultimately with Bobby Kotick at Activision, what I have become convinced that the most important criteria is engagement. And fan engagement and it is probably the single biggest metric that I look at. And I think media and the way that media will be distributed and the way media will play in the consumer's consumption of sports is critical to increased engagement and ultimately a more intense relationship between the fan and the content that the NFL produces in this case.
Yeah, we touched on that with Stephen Jones, and I talked about my son and his two pals are upstairs, and I use them as a small focus group. They don't sit and watch a full game, but they do touch sports through their Xbox, through their Snapchat, through their TikTok. Kevin, help me out. You have some inside knowledge of what the thought process is at the NFL, and now you're on the outside. I mean, you're running TMT at RedBird Capital, so you're in tech, media, telco. Help me out here. What should we be thinking about when we talk about media engagement and NFL valuations?
Yeah, look, I think the NFL now has visibility over the next decade plus into both its cost structure and labor, as well as in its media core live game rights distribution, right? So they have a very strong foundation from which to build and from which to invest. And I think, as we all know, as pay television continues to experience dislocation, engaging and reaching audiences in an increasingly fragmented media marketplace is going to be challenging. And there are opportunities, but it's going to be harder and harder given the fragmentation. And so I think what you'll see the NFL continue to do is invest in opportunities to reach and engage audiences wherever they may be consuming content during the live game window, as well as outside of the live game window. So I think you'll see using different mechanisms, sports betting clearly, and interactive gaming, as you referenced, are going to be part of that strategy. I think finding consumers and fans where they're otherwise spending time on social media platforms will continue to be part of that strategy. And I think increasingly they'll be investing in opportunities to reach fans where there aren't live sports. So as you think about places like Netflix and other SVOD platforms that don't have live sports, but there's a massive amount of consumption, I think you'll see the NFL trying to reach fans on those platforms with different types of content that may not be live games, but maybe investing in other types of content offerings that those fans are expecting to find on those types of platforms.
Yeah, I agree with everything Kevin said, but I would just make two clarifications. The first is pay television is in decline, but when you say that, you really mean pay linear television. Pay television consumption is only going to be increased witnessed by everything that's going on with the streaming world. And the second thing I would say, and it's somewhat, it's not facetious. Netflix isn't into sports, and I would add the word yet. I don't think ultimately they can compete to be the largest and biggest distributor of content if they don't serve that large subset of the audience that's interested in sport. So I believe there'll be players. I just don't know when they will be players, but it's the question of when, not if.
Right, but a reality series on F1 seems to have, and to use the word you like, engaged a U.S. audience on perhaps subject matter that it wouldn't ordinarily tune into, but here we are.
Yeah, to your point, I mean, my kids all of a sudden became Formula One fans. I mean, I'm a gearhead by definition, and I used to get up and watch it, and now they join me. Albeit they don't join me for the entire race, but they do want to see it because of that show, I think was the director.
Yeah. Football fans are going to find NFL content. I agree. I think Steve's spot on. It's about finding, the top of funnel, as they say, and having new, different types of content that would get someone who would otherwise may not be interested in NFL interested over time.
Right, gentlemen, so we're talking about engagement, reaching new fans. So I want to get to sports betting in a minute. But what about the gamification in terms of how one approaches the broadcast? What do you learn from Bobby Kotick? If he can get the kids on his platforms and stay for 10 hours a day, which, believe me, I got to scream, get off that darn thing. Roger Goodell would love to have the problem if my kid was so engaged with his product, I'm screaming, enough football already, go do your homework.
Yeah, so my thesis is it's really not about gambling. I mean, gambling, the dirty, dark secret is gambling already exists. We're just having the pleasure now of shining some light on it so we can see what's going on. What really is interesting is not the gambling concept, albeit I think that will be a source of revenue for teams and for others, but is the gamification of content. Yeah. And I think the gamification of content actually is across the board is going to be real, but it's going to be first developed in the world of sport. And I think that's what you're seeing with Genius Sports, and that's what you're seeing with others in this field, is that they're trying to make the engagement stickier, the engagement more compelling for the consumer, and the new consumer, as we just discussed, is quite attracted to it.
Yeah, Kevin, let me know if this resonates with you,
for a reason.
Let me know if this resonates with you, Kevin. I beta tested Steve Ballmer's Court Vision product, and there was one part where over the head of the player was the shooting percentage, and it changed with every step that player took on the floor and who was guarding them. I got dizzy, and I told Steve this, I couldn't watch it. It made me dizzy. My son was like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. Every broadcast should have that. Is that where we're headed? Just the kids want a gamified presentation of whether it's Fortnite or Call of Duty. They can just process so much more than I can watching a screen.
Well, I think you give them alternatives, right? You don't have to try and force fit an experience into one, endpoint. So I think if you want to have alternative presentations of NFL live games over linear broadcasts, over digital with different features and functionality, in a sports betting setting, the NFL is not going to force feed sports betting on a mass audience. But if someone wants to go find it and the NFL can provide it through its partners or otherwise, a great betting experience or a great interactive experience for someone who's really heavy on stats, and you can self-select into that experience, I think you can appeal to a broad range of audiences there. And I also think you fish where the fish are, right? So if your kids are on Fortnite, the NFL should be thinking about licensing content to Epic Games and creating new experiences within Fortnite that are NFL themed, where kids are spending all this time, in that experience. And so there should be a presence there in that experience by way of example, to also serve content in a way that's, endemic to that experience, to the folks who are already going to be there consuming and behaving as they are, as your kids and my kids are in that Fortnite experience.
Well, the NFL put skins in the game of Fortnite. So, Steve, let me ask you, because this is the question I had when my kid came to me, said, Dad, I want to buy this skin, the uniform that they wear in the game, and I don't remember how much it was. But the question I asked myself, of course, being an egghead in this industry, was who needs who more in this relationship? Because it isn't often the NFL needed somebody or anything. But did Fortnite need the NFL, or did the NFL need Fortnite to penetrate that younger demo?
Oh, well, listen, to quote Kevin, you go where the fish are. Yeah. The bottom line is the younger demo is consuming content in a different fashion. And so, yes, if they're consuming it on Fortnite or they're consuming it on TikTok, it's kind of unimportant to the NFL. They just need to be omnipotent, and they are, and omnipresent. So to me, it's a mutual symbiotic relationship between the two. The interesting thing to me that on your earlier comment was, you just have to get with the program. The fact that you're confused by or dizzy by new graphic presentation of sport is generational. I go back to 30 years ago when David Hill of Fox invented the shot, the Fox box, I think is what they called it, which was basically the score and time constantly on the screen. Well, the traditionalists and the purists in the business were screaming and yelling that this was, heresy and you should take away with it. Now I defy you to watch a football game without the shot box or without the 1st and 10 line. So what you see in Second Spectrum, which is a company that Sports Genius was smart enough to acquire, is the next generation of how we're going to consume this content. And it's going to be, you pick it's going to be, instead of one to everyone, it's going to be, a signal to individuals. And that ultimately is how you're going to consume sport, whether you're 30 years old or 13 years old or 80 years old.
So Kevin, you've been inside, now you're on the outside, so to speak. But tell me then, what are the opportunities available to NFL franchise owners, whether it's in terms of investment in teams that they can utilize first with the teams and then scale to the rest of the world? What are the opportunities available because they have such dominant brands?
Well, look, I think in the NFL in particular, a lot of the opportunities on the media side will present itself in the national media model. I mean, one of the reasons the valuation of NFL franchises is substantially going up is because of that national media model that's achieved such scale and represents the national revenue, could represent north of 70% of a team's annual revenue at this stage. And so all the themes we've been discussing here, you can be sure are being evaluated and explored, if not executed, at the league office in terms of finding ways to get maintain reach, distribution, to get the broadest audience possible, to drive engagement across a fragmented digital media marketplace, to focus on digital distribution, focus on younger demos, both delivering it on the linear feed as well as finding ways to reach them where they're otherwise consuming content. I think that plus the inherent scarcity value of the intangible asset of a franchise is going to carry the day for an owner of a football team in terms of increased valuation.
How many days will it carry? Do I need to be nervous as an NFL owner that there is a bubble, that there is a plateau? The audiences for the live experience seem to say no. Steve, you tell me, is there a risk factor out there? And if so, what is it? Have they identified it?
I think it's there's certainly risk, but it is pretty interesting to look at the arc of their progress, and it continues to go straight upwards. And that has to do, frankly, with what Kevin mentioned earlier. They have great management at the NFL, both at the league level and the team levels. They've managed to make their labor partners in their efforts. So they have labor peace and they have long-term media rights, and they're putting on a quality game. So where they need to grow is how can they make more avid fans, which is what they focus on in their marketing efforts, and how do they increase that engagement, and how do they grow the pie? The beautiful thing about the National Football League is that it's basically an American sport. And if you look at the world, I mean, they have an opportunity to grow it substantially, given the fact that, there are only 350 million people that live here and there's 7 billion people on the planet. So when I look at their prospects, and it's not going to be easy to make this sport resonate offshore, but to me, that's a high priority. That's one of the reasons why they put some of their best people involved in it. The fellow running the guy, Chris Halpern, is charged with making that work. And to me, that long term is a big upside for the National Football League, as well as the fact that they have yet to exploit the digital consumption as aggressively as they will, and they will with their new media deals, with their new Genius Sports deals, with all of this coming to fruition, with Amazon being a major partner again, all of that will increase their digital presence and make it, I think, a much more compelling product.
And I want to get back to that in data in a moment, but they are flipping the paradigm a bit when it comes to globalization, in that the NFL is now putting the onus on teams to promote the game and themselves, offering markets to individual teams. So we just got off with Stephen Jones, and he says, of course, the Cowboys will aggressively pursue Mexico. So they're flipping a little bit. Kevin, you were there. Now you're on the outside. Do you like that model whereby now the onus is put on the teams to utilize their capital to promote not only their own brands, probably not exclusively, but the league in itself? I mean, the league wins if teams are out pushing NFL football around the world.
I think that's right. I think that it'll be a dual track strategy, with the league office doing what it does to promote the game internationally in new territories such as Germany. And I think by having an effort at the local level where clubs can also invest in growing their brand internationally, that's just going to lift all the boats. And the equities of the overall NFL model between the 32 clubs will be managed and balanced accordingly over time. But I think having everybody rowing in the same direction to grow the league internationally, and doing so both through local investment in international markets as well as nationally through efforts in Europe and Germany and in Asia, I think that that's all going to be a win for all 32 clubs.
All right, Steve, help me out here on the Genius. They get the official data deal with the NFL. Costs a pretty penny. Equity given to the NFL. It's not cheap, but it certainly puts you on the map. Where's the play for Genius with NFL? And is the official data the real value proposition here? Because it does go down that funnel if you're looking at sports betting around the world.
Well, listen, I've been involved in a lot of different media companies, and I would put Genius Sports in that category in dealing with the National Football League, and they have done very well with them. I remember when the initial '94 DirecTV deal was done. I think the NFL would have been really happy if they had gotten an equity piece of DirecTV as it continued to acquire. The same can be said back in 1987 with the initial NFL ESPN deal, the first time that the NFL went to cable. So I look at this as, official data is clearly the most important. It has the highest integrity, and if anything, the NFL, one of its core values is the integrity of the data. So that's why we particularly like the being the official supplier of that data. But to me, it is essentially the big growth engine for the NFL in increasing viewer engagement. I keep coming back to that because that to me is the critical KPI, as it were, for the National Football League. They're putting a great product on the screen. They have labor peace. They have strong revenue streams on their media partners. So they have wide and varied distribution. So the trick to me is how do you increase that engagement? We did that, maybe I forget, 10 years ago when we launched the Red Zone channel. Initially all our broadcast partners and many, pundits of the media scene thought we were going to basically cannibalize ourselves. And what we experienced was that all boats rose. What we ended up having was the Red Zone channel increased the Sunday afternoon viewership because it became a second screen promoter of the games that were going on. We see, being the official sports data supplier, particularly in game, we're going to be able to rise all boats and make engagement and interest in the games increase. That's the plan. And I have to say, there's a lot of history that supports that is a pretty successful recipe.
Right. I love this. Kevin, you were on the other side. You were still at the NFL working on that deal. So as much as you can you give you sort of that preview of what the thinking was, and is that where you landed as well, or where the NFL landed?
Yeah, look, Genius brought to the table an exceptional perspective in the marketplace. Their leadership, Mark Locke, has a perspective around the convergence, as Steve put it, kind of gamification media, germane to your question, which is that this is all one big, convergent industry where you're just going to have the difference between sports betting and interactive gaming and watching a game is going to become indistinguishable. And Mark and the team at Genius had that perspective. They were coming in, had already built a great book of business, very strong internationally with EPL. But as you know, the NFL, in the sports betting space domestically, you get that from a data distribution perspective, and you got yourself a really strong anchor from which to grow and build and expand. And as Steve mentioned, that playbook has been played out many times and almost always successfully. And while it's not necessarily quote unquote cheap on a headline basis, long-term enterprise value creation, it proves to be very lucrative. And Mark and team saw it. The NFL saw it because they wanted to create alignment with Mark and the team, realizing that the weight that the NFL can carry in the sports betting market from a data perspective and from a share perspective. And then to the extent that is a foundation upon which Genius can grow its business and its enterprise value, and the NFL is participating in that growth, that's another area where you can look back to team valuations and say, hey, well, there's another reason these teams are going to become more valuable, because the NFL is diversifying its business model by taking equity positions and driving growth in companies, both from a direct NFL commercial perspective, but also from an enterprise value perspective, that they're going to participate in that. And so that's a great use case that, again, as Steve referenced, we've seen it in the past, time and time again, it'd be successful.
If I was channeling Rupert Murdoch right now, I would tell you that the reason that the Fox network existed at the level it does was because of the relationship with the National Football League.
Yeah, we talked with, it was funny. I don't know, even Kevin, you might not be old enough, but we were joking earlier about would the Simpsons exist without the NFL and that Fox deal, since it was like part of the Tracy Ullman show. I'm like, Steve, you remember that. It needed that. NFL really created Fox and created other programming, and well, it was that powerful. You're right. So Steve, so lastly, we'll get you out here on this then. If you peek around the corner, you're telling me you think Netflix will be involved? We know Amazon's involved.
Well, I don't think, I'm highly confident. I won't say I think, I'm highly confident that any streamer in the future will be in the live sports space, because they're all about aggregating audiences. And why would you ignore a minority, but sizable minority audience out there of people that want to consume live sports? And you take what we're doing at Genius and you take what the NFL is doing, we're only going to make the NFL more compelling to the consumer. So as this content increases to become more compelling, as witnessed by whatever list you want to look at, the top 100 shows on television for the last, 10 years have been, 90% football, and it's only increasing. So to me, sports is a key driver of all of these streaming services. So why would you not be in that business?
I would add to Steve's point, to the extent you're moving other product, whether it be advertising or devices or wireless plans, one of the best places to support that is going to be NFL content. So Sunday Ticket to the
exclusive content, right, Kevin? That's your differentiator.
Ideally, exclusive content. I mean, that has been the premium that gets paid to the NFL for exclusivity is one to drive, obviously, direct value in the commercial relationship, but also to drive the indirect value of an ARPU of a subscription service, or additional advertising that you can bundle up across your platform or hardware.
And I would add the official product too. I mean, the integrity of sport and the integrity of the game is critical to the National Football League. It has always been and will continue to be. And to me, that's a really important criteria, that you have the right information that's been sanctified by them.
And fast too. It's got to be right. It's not unlike journalism, right, guys? What do I say, Kevin? It better be right. It better be fast. That's what I tell my staff. So right. Same in the media, but we'll talk about that. Well, Steve Bornstein, we thank you. We thank Genius Sports for helping bring this and make it a reality. Kevin LaForce, RedBird Capital, thanks so much. I hope you guys stick around or at least tune in when we have Al Guido, president of the 49ers, and Jason Wright, president of the Washington football team. We're going to get that team purview of a franchise value. So thanks, gentlemen.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.